I don't know about you, but I have encountered this frustration sometimes when reading the news, seeing the headlines or watching the broadcast or radio or things like that, that the headline, the soundbite catches our attention and it gets us maybe, upset. We think, what? And then we find out, well, maybe that wasn't like the whole story. And there was actually some context that, well, that would have been different if they said it that way. And they didn't necessarily say it, they didn't tell a lie. It was technically true, and yet still misleading. Well, let me give you an example. This was a few years back. This was 2020, when we were still in that first kind of period of lockdown, and there were different places, different cities had different requirements, and I saw a broadcast that said that the mayor of some suburb up in the DFW area had said that churches would be open for in-person worship. And then, because, it was like TV, they needed some footage for behind that, and they showed video in front of the First United Methodist Church in that town. And I had just talked to that pastor, the colleague, and I knew for sure they were not going to be having in-person worship. So even though what they said was technically true, the mayor of that city had indeed said churches could be open, and they didn't specifically say that that church would have worship in person. But any viewer, it would be a logical assumption to make, right? That would be one of the churches that would have in-person worship. And yet that would be incorrect. So something can be technically true and yet also not entirely truthful. Do you see what I'm saying? And we run into this all the time. And it's frustrating because we sometimes have to fact check everything. And that just gets exhausting. I was reminded of something this week that I wanted to share with you. I knew it, but sometimes we still need to be reminded of stuff that we know. I don't know about you anyway. The older I get, the more that happens. I need to be reminded again and again. But as people of faith, we have a way that we can get through that kind of mess. That kind of, is this true? What's going on? Figure it out, fact check stuff. We have a better way of evaluating truth. And that's through the lens of Christ. Let me explain. You may remember the words of Jesus from John chapter 14, where he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. Listen to what else he says. He's talking to his disciples, preparing them for the time that he will not be with them in person any longer. And he says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments. I will ask the Father, and he will send another companion who will be with you forever. This companion is the Spirit of truth, whom the world can't receive because it neither sees him nor recognizes him. You know him because he lives with you and will be with you. I won't leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Soon the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you will live too. On that day, you will know that I am in my Father, you are in me, and I am in you. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them loves me. Whoever loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them." Let us hear what the Spirit of God is speaking to God's people. So in here, this passage that at least part of it probably sounds familiar. I've read some of these verses at many, many funerals, memorial services. But this part where Jesus promises a companion, another translation is an advocate. The Greek word is paraclete. And it's kind of hard to translate. That's why we see different understandings there. But what I find really interesting here is not just the comfort, the promise that Jesus gives, but look carefully. I will ask the Father, and he will send another companion. Another. Well, that means that we already have seen or have one, right? You can't have another unless you have one to start with. And so when we look at this, in light of what Jesus has said just before about being the way and the truth and the life, and then we see that this companion or advocate will be the Spirit of truth. Jesus is the truth. That this Spirit will be a continuation of the work of Jesus. Jesus is the first companion or advocate. He is the one who was with them in person. But he says there will be another that comes after him. And naming that other as the Spirit of truth indicates that that Spirit will be in continuity with his own. So we will know that Spirit of truth because it will be consistent with what we saw in Jesus. It will continue the teachings of Jesus. So, what Jesus is saying here is that the way we experience God is an extension of Jesus' earthly work. If we want to know what is truth, we look at what Jesus did, who Jesus was. It will be consistent with that. So here's how I think that helps us. When we encounter the amount of information that bombards us every day, which is a tremendous amount, we hear all kinds of claims, of arguments, of things that people are telling us that we need to believe. But we also know that there is a lot of misinformation mixed in, that not all of what is coming to us is coming with good intention. And not all that's coming, even with good intention, is accurate or helpful, right? I don't know about you, but what I have discovered in myself and what I see in some others, I think we have kind of initially one of two reactions. When we are faced with some claim, some information that, especially of the kind that's emotional or, gets a reaction out of us. One direction we can go sometimes is, okay, we just accept. You just believe it because it comes from somewhere that you think you should be able to trust. And so you uncritically just accept that information. Or sometimes when I'm, really concentrating on critical thinking and I receive some information and I go, that provokes a reaction, but where's that coming from? Is this correct? Some information, is easier to fact check than others. With the example I gave earlier, the producer or, person who authored that news bite and that image probably should have checked with the church that they were filming to see if that church would in fact have in-person worship. That would have been a more responsible thing to do. And when we are in a position where we choose what to share or how we share it, we should do the responsible thing and make sure that we have, in fact, checked out, verified what we're sharing. But sometimes it's harder to, than just looking it up on a website or making a phone call. Sometimes it's harder to figure out what the truth is. And when that happens, sometimes what I find myself doing is I get like down this rabbit hole. Well, I checked this, and okay, well, that part of it was true. This part was maybe true, but a different word would have been better. And then I get, I totally into the weeds. And when that happens, I think the best thing that we can do, and fortunately, I remembered this week when I was heading down one of those rabbit holes, was, wait a second. I have a different verification question. an entirely different validation for whether or not I should be spending my time and energy on this information. The lens of Christ says, does this help me love God or love my neighbor? Well, if that question precedes the others, then those weeds, which little pieces and threads were true or maybe not so much, or which ones were misleading, that becomes irrelevant. Is this helping me love God or love my neighbor? Most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, it really doesn't matter. And when I remember to use that bar, we can save ourselves a lot of time and energy. Because if this is not helping us love God or our neighbor, then we do not need to waste any more time or energy on it. We can disregard. It's not relevant. Obviously, there are things that are important for us to know. I'm not saying information doesn't matter. But I'm suggesting that when we sometimes get down into that, we've had an emotional reaction and we're trying to fact check this and worried about it, there's another level that matters way more than whether we can track down those sources or not. And what matters way more is, how does this help me love God or love my neighbor? So that's what I try to use. The Spirit of truth. The Spirit of truth is loving, helpful, responsible, considers the needs of my neighbor, considers the needs of those who cannot advocate for themselves. And so, when we come across information, a claim that says, you should care about this makes you upset, we can ask, okay, where were their sources? I'll double check and track it down, and we can go down into the weeds. Or we can ask, is this Christ-like? If this is Jesus' truth, share away. If it is not, just walk away. I think that will help us sort through some unnecessary wastes of time and energy when we get right down to it. We hear something, it makes us upset or concerned or scared, and we want to react first. Does this help me love God or my neighbor? If not, let's not waste any time. Disregard. And instead, focus on our neighbor who probably needs a phone call or a cookie, a pick-me-up, And I think when we focus on that, we tend to get a lot less stuck in the weeds. I hope that is of some value to you as you encounter new information, especially those of you who are undergoing transitions, looking for new paths, new jobs, new seasons in life. There will be lots of things that demand your attention, that say, you should care about this. But not all of it is either true or helpful. Pay attention to only what helps you love God and your neighbor. I hope that you have been encouraged, uplifted, that you have found some value in your time with us. And I hope that you have grown in your relationship with God. If you have found that to be the case, if you are looking for the next step, if you are feeling nudged that God has something more for you to do, then I would love to help you discern that way forward. If you'd like, my contact information is on the bottom of the prayer request flap in the bulletin, and you can call or text or email me, and I would love to help you with that. If you are ready to make a decision this morning, if you want to share that decision either to accept Christ or reaffirm your faith or join with our community of faith, then I would love to celebrate that with you. And I would invite you to come and share that with me as we stand and sing together. Let's sing Trust and Obey.
When we walk with the Lord in the light of His word, what a glory He sheds on our way. While we do His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Then in fellowship sweet, we will sit at His feet, or we'll walk by His side in the way. What He says we will do, where He sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey.
You again for choosing to begin your week in worship with us. I pray that you make it home or your next destination safely and, well, drier than not, although that may be quite a challenge. I pray that as you go about this week, you will know that the Spirit of truth is with you, is there for you, and you will know because it's Jesus. Go in peace.